Good afternoon, everyone. I am Fran Moisa, a headhunter and talent advisor, broadcasting live from lovely Malta. And the spotlight today on SHIO series is on artificial intelligence. And I'm delighted that Dr. Jejagat has agreed to join us and share his knowledge with us. Dr. Jejagat is an IT law specialist, digital entrepreneur, and co-founder and director of Evo AI, which is an artificial intelligence platform disrupting the customer engagement industry. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome to the stream Jeje. Jeje, good afternoon, welcome.
Hi, Fran. Thank you for having me here today. I'm very delighted to be here and I'm happy to speak about a subject which is very dear to me, artificial intelligence.
Thank you, Jeje. So you've been quite a prominent figure, I would say, locally and not only in the adoption of artificial intelligence and trying to educate the mainstream public on it. So perhaps the first question I think we should start off with is, what is AI? Because if you ask me, for example, at least if you used to ask me a couple of years ago, what is AI? I would tell you, oh, Sophia the robot. I guess that there are a lot of people on the same page with me. So it would be great to have a broader perspective on it from your side as well.
For sure, Fran, and I get that question quite a lot, and possibly that's because artificial intelligence is often misunderstood. It is either considered to be something which is irrelevant to business and society, or on the other hand, it often gets trivialized by the Hollywood sensationalism of robots or so on and so forth. The truth is perhaps somewhere in between. Well, artificial intelligence is actually a combination of several complex technologies, not one. But the best way to think about it is as a system that is very good at ingesting, at receiving, at analyzing data quickly. And once it does that, it's very good at mimicking human-like decision-making and human-like behavior. And it's interesting that when your webcast started, you started with the Latin verb, which means to know. And that is what AI tries to do. It tries to know and understand, interpret the data that it receives, and then take a decision on it. And so understanding AI in this context, so less of a robot, but more of a system which is able to receive an input of a large quantity of data, understand it, manipulate it perhaps, and take a human-like decision from it, that's a better understanding of AI and its capabilities.
Agreed. Thank you for sharing that with us. And in your experience, how can businesses adopt artificial intelligence?
Right. So it's a great place to start, Fran. So thank you for that question. Very often, just like with any other technology, adoption needs to be related to an educational process. So a lot of businesses, a lot of individuals who wish to work in AI first need to go through an organizational readiness stage where their company gets the right skills to start understanding the technology. But assuming that that is done, I think one of the best ways to adopt AI is to focus on quick wins, or perhaps, low-hanging fruit, right? You don't need to win on every process within AI. So an organization, a company today has many processes, has many activities that it conducts, but very often choosing one which is the pain point for the organization. Perhaps it's costing too much, or maybe it's too slow, right? And there are many examples. Often customer service is one of these examples, right? But picking low-hanging fruit on which you could win, that's a good way to start an adoption. Another key principle, Fran, over here is this idea of gathering data. In my definition about AI, I mentioned that AI is a system which can capture a large amount of data. So it's quite useful for an organization to start capturing data about its customers, its processes, its throughput. So in the gaming or in the financial services sector, just to mention two markets which I know you're interested in, Fran, it's useful to start understanding basic data points like, for example, what is the satisfaction rating of our customers? What type of questions hit us the most? What is our reaction time? What is our cost per inquiry? What are the most common languages at particular time slots? So these different data points, as well as the accumulation of transactions with the customers, start giving the business the idea of where the pain point is, where the quick win with AI could be. So starting with an education process, identifying a quick win, and then getting some data points around that quick win is probably the right path to adoption. But maybe I shouldn't stop without talking about culture. I have found, Fran, and perhaps you've had this experience too, that very often adopting technology is not as simple as adopting a software product. It's really about changing culture. It's changing the way we perceive business, the way we perceive how we do things. And often change is not the problem, right, within an organization. It's the resistance to change, which is. So when we wish to adopt AI within an organization, we need to ensure that apart from getting the technology level right, we also have the cultural change right. So we need to think about change strategy and change management. And we need to ask questions like this. Do the people in our organization trust the AI which we are bringing in? Do they trust the outputs which AI, or the decisions which AI is taking? And when we start grappling with these questions, it will also give us an indication of what to do next. So if our organization doesn't trust AI, why is that? Do we need to focus more on education? Do we need to retrain our personnel to understand what it means to work in a workplace which is part human and part AI? So there is a large cultural barrier to adoption. And if we get the technology right, if we get the processes right, but we fail on changing culture, adoption of AI is often problematic. So these are 4 tips, 4 areas to think about in adopting AI, Fran.
Thank you, Jeje. What about businesses that do not capture data? Can they still benefit from AI, and how?
Okay, I think that's a great question to struggle with. Let me start off with the inverse of the question, which is, why do we need data? I think I touched on it earlier in my response, but I probably add these 2 layers. The first layer is data is critical for profiling. I think we all agree that the correlation of success is with understanding your market, understanding your customer, the customer's need. And every data point which can help us understand the profile of the customer, the context within our conversation with the customer, will allow us to predict better the needs of our customers. And Fran, some industries are just so dynamic. Think of retail, think of gaming, think of insurance, think of banking. The needs of our customers change so rapidly that the more we can understand their profile, the better we could serve them, and the better we can predict what the next thing we need to present to them is. So it's critical to capture data for profiling. And I'll add another layer to that, because I said there are 2. It's not simply about capturing that data. It's actually more relevant to make sure that the data which we captured can become actionable. In other words, Fran, the game is not about data collection. The game is about executing the knowledge out of that data into a business process that can make the company better. Right? So it's making that dusty data in our CRM, in our spreadsheets, in our business systems, bringing it to the front line, making it operational, giving value to that data by making our processes a little bit more efficient. So my baseline is always, we need to collect data, we need to analyze data, and we need to make it actionable. But now to your question, which is, but what if I don't have data? And Fran, I must say there are many organizations that speak to us. We say, we're a startup, we have no data, or we are a legacy organization and have never bothered capturing data at all. Well, although I would prefer an environment which is data rich, I will say, Fran, that today machines are becoming less artificial and more intelligent, right? And that means that we are relying much less on bottom-up data, right? So informed CRM systems, which give you a decision at the top, and more AI, which is what we call top-down reasoning. In other words, AI today has the capability to resemble the way that humans themselves approach problems and tasks. So even in an environment where we don't have enough data, enough bottom-up transformation, AI could still play a very significant role in helping a business become more capable, more competent, more able to succeed. So one perfect example of this, Fran, which many people have seen in the market, is what the company AlphaGo have been doing, right, which is a subsidiary of Google. So when they trained AlphaGo Zero in 2015 to win the game of Go, which, as you know, is an Asian strategy game, which is extremely complex. It took them about 3 days to train the AI and a large amount of data for this bottom-up process. But in only 3 or 4 years, when they, again, last year, trained the new version of the product, which was called Alpha Zero, they only needed 8 hours and almost no data at all. Why? Because our capabilities in computer science, our capabilities in AI, have meant that the advancement of our tools don't rely on the absolute necessity of having so much baseline data. And we have now the cognitive ability to almost think like a human, and therefore provide capabilities in no data environments. And I think that's fascinating.
It is indeed. It is indeed, and it shows how far we've come in adopting these tools that are at our disposal and making them work for businesses that find themselves in all types of situations. And I like that you said the fact that some businesses can say, but we are a legacy, we don't capture data, and it's actually more common than we would think. That businesses go from referrals, word of mouth, more conservative and traditional ways of doing things, very much paper based, and disruption is happening all around us, whether we want to be part of it or not. And I think that we have benefited a lot from the noise and the mainstream knowledge that blockchain technology has brought to the general market, which kind of lifted AI in the spotlight as well and gave everyone an opportunity to start questioning it. Because I think it would be, for example, in my case, when one of the questions that I get quite a lot, as you can imagine, is, how will AI impact the job market? We will end up without jobs, will we still work? And I went at the beginning from, this is never going to work, to then, this might work and perhaps we can coexist. Then, to universal income idea, will be, sitting on a beach, sipping cocktails while AI does all of our jobs. And then I thought, oh, no, I don't like the idea of that. Let's go back somewhere in the middle. And it's great that we are given the opportunity to go through this thought process and challenge our ideas and our preconceptions of what AI is, what robotics is, what blockchain is, and all of the digital tools and tech tools that we have at our disposals, both as humans and as businesses alike. And what I would like to understand, because this will be an absolute crucial point for businesses in the adoption of AI, is how can AI create a competitive advantage for businesses?
Right. So first of all, Fran, and perhaps we'll speak about the impact on the job market in a few minutes. I think it's such an interesting point that you brought up over there. But let's talk about competitive advantage, because this is a critical moment for businesses, especially in a post-COVID world, where they feel they need to be even more competitive, even more efficient than they ever were. Let me start off by this proviso. Fran, I don't think that technology is the answer to everything. Very often good old skills in business still are true today. So let's be clear that AI is not a solution for everything, but AI, and technology in general, does have some very, very key benefits and key competitive advantages. So let's talk about a few. The first one, it's very good at customer identification. You know, in English, we have that expression of trying to find a needle in a haystack. And it's so complex for us humans, but it's not at all for AI. AI is built to find the needle in the haystack. So in customer identification processes, where companies are trying to look out for who their customers are, AI is brilliant because it could look at very large data sets and identify the few dozens which you want to target. AI is very good at listening abilities. So think about the regulated environment that we have in healthcare, in gaming, in financial services, where we're always trying to look for at-risk customers, vulnerable players, right? AI is very good at listening to large amounts of data sets, constantly comparing them and identifying that individual customer which may be at risk, on whom we may need to intervene. AI is also very good at unbiased assessments, right? And that is a huge advantage. So very often, when humans process cases, now this applies, you know, from the judiciary to individuals doing, let's say, AML and KYC processes within companies or onboarding activities, right? There is human bias. I tend to prefer a certain type of person, and so I allow or disallow a mortgage, I allow or disallow a gaming deposit, I allow or disallow a next round, or whatever that may be. There is a lot of human bias in decision making, sometimes also human fatigue. You know, at the end of an 8-hour shift, some people are just exhausted, so their cognitive ability reduces. AI has none of that bias unless it is intentionally built in. There's no bias. And so it is able to make assessments rapidly at a very large set of data, and do so without fatigue, without bias, and at a very high level of cognitive ability. So AI has this advantage, Fran, of being able to manage data patterns, right? And helping businesses find that needle in the haystack, find that odd customer, find that vulnerable customer, or determine decisions which would otherwise have required a lot of time for a human to go through in order to create an outcome. Now, let me just give you some examples of this, Fran, because I hate discussions which talk about AI in theory and never bring it down to a practical explanation. A lot of the work which EBO is doing with the NHS, the public health sector in the UK, but also in the private healthcare sector in Malta, we're bringing in entirely new level of efficiencies in the way patients manage their interaction with hospitals. You know, gone are the days where you could only call your healthcare provider Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. We all want a 24/7 relationship with our healthcare provider. You know, from the basic stuff like being able to set or cancel appointments. We want to do it from the convenience of our smartphone, through a chat perhaps, you know, in an informal but secure way. And if you look at these new layers of capabilities which we're bringing into organizations, we're literally transforming them from an organization which is only open for 30, 40 hours a week to a 24/7 entity, which can now play on multiple channels, speak multiple languages. And I think that brings us back to the ethical objectives of AI should assist humanity in achieving its goals. So what we're really doing is enabling organizations to better serve their patients, which I think is a very important aspect. You know, I'm talking about the needle in the haystack. Let's just give an example which a lot of us often would understand, would relate to. Netflix, right? The video streaming service. So whilst you are watching Netflix, Fran, Netflix is watching you. It's understanding, you know, which parts do you skip, which series do you enjoy, and it will only pump production money in those areas where data is indicating it should. So AI is being used to look at all of these viewership patterns, and that in turn informs the management level where the financial investment should go. So previously, series or genres which would not be funded because, you know, an advisor would have said that's a bad idea, can now in fact be developed and be financed and grow, specifically because we can look at these large data sets and take informed decisions every second, every minute in real time. So we often use AI to predict where the trends may be in the future. In COVID, we used AI to predict, what will be the next most affected area in the country. How many resources do we need to flow? Because AI, Fran, is ultimately maths, right? It's about modeling complex questions and being able to classify and predict outcomes. So there is a very important competitive advantage that AI can bring. And here are just a few highlights that I put forward to you, to make it as practical as possible to your listeners.
Thank you, Georgia. And I think they're very important and highlights that speak to everyone. And especially I would like to pick upon the ability of AI to identify customers that are at risk, which for a business can reduce potential liability drastically. For example, in the financial services industry, if we look at the trading industry, and actually when AI starts to become mainstream, I thought, okay, trading is going to be impacted by it. Because it can capture, like I said, large amounts of data and replicate behaviors, but at the same time predict success of stocks, of investments, of any particular asset classes that are being traded. In the reverse on gaming, if we see someone that is gambling consistently, it is able to raise a flag and assist with the process of responsible gaming and potential liability. I think when we were talking earlier before we went live, we looked at certain industries that are prime and very ripe for AI, and we spoke about the insurance industry in particular, especially when it comes to management of claims, as well as collecting vast amounts of customer queries, filter them, layer them based on urgency, but also truth and transparency as well, because there will still be, quite a lot of claims that could be bogus or don't have any merit, which consumes for humans. I'm laughing because that's what my daughter calls us, humans. Mommy, did you see the humans on the street? Because humans, it consumes a lot of time for us to go through that vast amount of data and to go back and forth with the client to ascertain the viability of a claim. For it. And what you've mentioned about NHS is, and healthcare in general, not just the NHS, the ability to be in touch with your healthcare provider, whoever that may be, in any language at any time is absolutely crucial. And especially I came across this from personal experience as a parent when my daughter was younger and she had something and it was never anything major, but because I didn't know, I got scared and I thought, oh, I need to go to the hospital. But at the weekend, for example, I could not get in touch with anyone. And it was, grim. And being able to use AI in such a way to facilitate and to improve the experience that we have as consumers in whatever area it may be, healthcare, financial services, insurance, game, whatever you want to look at it, can bring, just to wrap up what you said, a distinct competitive advantage, but also looking beyond that can bring a lot of easiness into the world, I think.
I agree. AI needs to ultimately be a tool for societal good. So anything that stimulates conversations, that helps enterprise get closer to its customer to serve it better, is something that AI should do.
Agreed. And to go back a little bit to what we said about how the job market will be impacted by AI, and can humans and AI coexist in an ethical partnership and have a symbiotic, flourishing relationship rather than a parasitic one, if I can draw examples from biology.
Yeah, I think it's such an important question that you ask. And I think it's one that we need to constantly think about with our educators, with our universities, and with, of course, those who are formulating public policy. So I think we need to start off, Fran, by recognizing that some jobs will go, and that is a reality that we need to digest. But other jobs, which we don't even have a name for today, will be created. And when your daughter is our age, she'll probably be doing things that we don't even imagine are possible today, because there are going to be new sectors of the economy which will emerge due to AI. So let's start with the first part, the jobs that will go. Let's just focus on that a little bit. Low-skilled jobs, Fran, are the ones which are most likely to be at risk. Most analysts assume that 15% of any workforce of any country is likely to be that low-skilled workforce, which is most probably to be challenged by the automation that AI brings. Now, 15% might sound like a small number, but it's not, Fran. 15% of the American job market is 13 million people. That's not a small amount. So which are these type of jobs? Well, the classic call center, that's going to go. The classic accountant who is, repeatedly performing financial tasks on inputs and outputs, that's likely going to be a job which is automated. Cashiers, it's likely going to go. The concept of a driver going from fixed point A to B is already hugely changed through most of Europe, Fran. But I'll even go further. I think even the classic understanding of what teaching is, which needs to change radically, is likely to change. And we've seen it change quite recently in COVID, where we started seeing a degree of AI and app-based teaching, which is mediated by a human rather than delivered. I think those are the jobs which are likely to go. But let's talk about the new jobs, right? I think AI will find it hard to negotiate, complex social relationships. AI will find it hard to be creative. And I'd like to use this space, Fran, to kind of pause on this concept. And we really need to distinguish what is information or data and what is knowledge. AI is good at information, storing data, sorting through it, deciding on it. But knowledge is the wisdom that we create when we distance ourselves from that information, from the data. And that is critical. So I think the ability to create knowledge, the soft skills around that, will remain an extremely human capability, which AI will never challenge. And that is why today I think employability is less about what you already know and have learned, and more about your capacity to adapt and to learn going forward. And so the future of jobs is likely to be one where we see more reliance on the creative economy, on knowledge management, on soft skills. Of course, we are going to be creating new jobs which we haven't thought of now. I'm imagining that today's handyman will become tomorrow's 3D plumber, right? I think that, the drivers who are not going to be in employment because that process is automated will have a very important role in teaching the AI models what delivery and logistics is all about. So it's also about understanding that the job market is changing rather rapidly. One of the concerns that I often speak about is that our universities seem to be very good at creating professionals that we've created for the last 10, 100 years, lawyers, medics, and so on. But are we sufficiently capable of creating those cognitive and knowledge-based skills which we're going to need just in 5 to 10 years' time? So the reflection that we have here needs to also reach our educators, reach our educational institutions to make sure that they are transforming as fast as we need them to, and as fast as we are claiming businesses should. Right? And I think that's an important discussion, which is a national one.
Absolutely agreed with you. Especially at an educational university level, we need to emphasize the soft skills, as we said, empathy, listening skills, negotiation skills, the ability to adapt and resistance as well. I think resilience and resistance are two qualities that are very much in demand in businesses, and they will be sort of the, the, the gel, the catalyst, if you will, that will bring the AI and humans to work together as well. And we do have a question from the audience, Jajan. So let's see. Don't you believe that automation creates jobs by reducing the cost of products and services? A lower price means a larger market that creates jobs for everybody.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. So of course, just with every other economic theory, there are arguments for and against this proposition. Your viewer is making an excellent point, right? Because automation is going to create more efficient production. It's going to create higher levels of productivity. It's going to lower the cost of goods. I think it's also going to avoid boring and repetitive tasks. For those of you who follow the Gallup study on workplace engagement, which studies how much individuals are engaged in their job, you'll find that in most countries, it's very, very low. Most people are disengaged due to the repetitive boredom. And this is extremely high in manufacturing, where, of course, by its own nature, you have a repetitive process. So absolutely, we will also possibly enable the idea of a shorter work week, which is a very interesting prospect, because if AI can take some of the chores, then do we need to work a 5-day work week? And I think from an argument of choice, AI and automation can also give consumers a greater choice of goods. However, as with every economic theory, I think we need to balance also the disadvantages that automation can have. And that's, for example, one which we touched on earlier, is that it is going to displace some jobs. So there could be structural unemployment. So our legislators, people who are creating public policy, need to start realizing that the biggest threat to our economy is probably not individuals who are trying to enter the country, but the reality that AI poses the biggest challenge to employment. So we need to change our educational systems to cater for that. Automation could also monopolize power, because those firms which are fast to adopt AI, which was Fran's first question to me, will be the ones which will have a huge competitive advantage, and those which are slow to adopt AI may run out of business. So we are seeing China and America, who are in an AI race to try to very speedily adopt AI in their processes to become more efficient economies. And I think to some extent, we also need to reflect on the impact that AI has on human interactions. So when you have a large amount of processes which become automated, thus reducing interaction as we know it, we need to ask ourselves, what are the unintended consequences that that may have in society? So for example, in the students which I lecture, I find that some of them are finding it harder to formulate questions. It's almost that the better Google becomes at auto-completing your question, the slightly lazier you become in intellectually forming that. And as you know, growth and maturity is very often spurred on by questioning, know thyself, right? And going back to Fran's caption at the very beginning, knowledge, right? So I fully agree with the statement that your viewer has made, and I think that that is the very positive future that we must all aspire to. And although there are threats to this economic model, we must make sure that we become responsible users of AI, and that we all influence the political process to have a legal, ethical, and moral framework for AI to develop efficiently.
And if I may ask, another question, because you piqued my attention with that. What are your views on regulating AI from a legal framework perspective?
Right. So the European Commission has published a great paper called Trustworthy AI, which basically is not a law, right? So if the question is, should you legislate AI? The general response to that is no, it is too early to do that. And perhaps legislating AI in a traditional sense would stifle, would reduce the innovation drive which we need. However, that does not mean leaving it a free-for-all environment, Fran. So usually the in-between scenario is creating ethical guidelines which are adopted in industry and within governments to start creating a harness, an ethical framework for the development of AI. And that is what the European Commission has done. And it's got a paper called Creating Trustworthy AI, which sets a number of ethical principles under which AI should be developed. For example, that AI should respect human rights, that AI should be accountable, that it should be fair, that it should be transparent, and that it should be explainable. So the concept of explainability, Fran, is that when we build AI, we cannot create a black box which no one understands and say, well, that's the decision you need to abide by. No. There needs to be an explainability. So at minimum, we need to understand why AI is taking certain decisions, and that explainability becomes a requirement for it to operate in society. And when it operates correctly, society can trust AI. So you've got this interplay between law, ethics, politics, economic development. And it's a lovely period in the world's development that we are in, because we're seeing it all happen in our generation, which is amazing.
Indeed. It's as we would say, a great time to be alive and witness the challenge, the opportunity, and the change that this brings about. And we are at the end of the broadcast now, and one thought I would like to leave our viewers with is that when the Industrial Revolution came about, everyone said, "No, what is this? Don't do it." So we find ourselves in that opportunity again to really try and make our world better by enhancing the resources we have at our disposal in an ethical way as well. And Gigi, if you still have 2 more minutes, we have another question coming in, which is quite interesting that I would like to put on the screen. Would that be okay?
Sure.
So, would you please summarize what AI do better than humans and what humans do better than AI? What about common sense, creativity, and empathy?
Okay. Okay, this is a really interesting question, which I don't think that 2 minutes will do justice to, right? So I think what the viewer is talking about here are some very basic concepts of human agency, of emotional awareness, of cognitive ability. I think if you had to look at it from a philosophical perspective, here we're talking about consciousness. So can AI ever be conscious? Can it be creative? Can it feel, right? So the answer is no. AI is presently not at a level in which it could have consciousness as we understand it. So certainly humans are better than AI at consciousness, because AI can't do that. And I think consciousness is a very important part of what we use to define what a human being is, right? Consciousness and choice, right, which we call human agency, are two areas which we certainly need to always protect. So here are a couple of things which AI cannot do. AI can understand emotions and can mimic emotions, but it cannot have emotions. So humans are better at that. Humans can have self-awareness, right? The ability of the intellect to return to its own cognitive act, to look at itself. For those of you who are interested in philosophy, of course, Thomas Aquinas has the most important texts about this. So humans have self-awareness, which creates meaning and creates creativity, which is something that AI doesn't have. Humans can create original concepts and be creative. But here I'm going to be careful. I'm not going to say AI cannot do that. We've seen recently some incredible advancements in creativeness. So, for example, we have AI sculptors, AI musicians, which don't copy which just listen or see the sculptures of others and are able to demonstrate that which seems like human creativity. So the most important British computer scientist of our time who spoke about AI was Alan Turing, right? And Alan Turing often brought creativity down to this question: can the object of creativity surprise me? Now, I've seen some sculptures created by an AI tool which are beautiful and which would certainly pass the test of Alan Turing, which is they do surprise me. You look at them and they uplift you from an otherwise gloomy day. So although originality and creativity are concepts often ascribed to humans, we are seeing the first level of AI being able to touch that. Let's move into two other levels and then perhaps conclude this rather complex question. I'll talk a little bit about intentionality and autonomy, right? So human agency, human choice, philosophically means that we have the ability to choose with a degree of deliberate intention. And this is something which humans do better than AI. However, here too, we are seeing the first elements of AI being able to act autonomously. So even 10 years ago, in a very important AI conference called the Asilomar Conference of 2009, we recognized AI in robotics, which were able to autonomously identify a power source and autonomously charge themselves when needed so as to be able to remain active. We have seen even recently computer viruses developed through AI, which we call to have cockroach intelligence, which is a skill that autonomously allows them to evade security built to prevent them from entering. So we are seeing the first levels of intentionality from a technical point of view come in. And then the last element of this human versus AI could be perhaps the most important point, which is intelligence. So are humans better than AI in intelligence? Well, it depends how you define intelligence. If by intelligence you mean pure computation, right, algorithmic calculation, then not only is AI better than humans, it is infinitely better than humans because it is able to compute at a speed which has for many years already been much faster from that of humans. But if you define intelligence with knowledge, I spoke about this earlier in my response to Fran, therefore intelligence being elevated to contain a degree of consciousness, thinking about thought, right? Then AI cannot be defined as being intelligent. And in that regard, certainly humans trump AI. But I'll end with this last sentence, because this was a very complex, partly philosophical question, which I'd love to speak about at length. But I'd end with this line. I would invite this viewer to see less of this world of humans versus AI, but rather creating the framework for AI to serve humans to fulfill our social mission, to fulfill humanity's need, right, of self-improvement, of growth. So seeing AI as an instrument, if you wish, to help humanity move forward. And I think that is a more positive outlook towards this symbiosis between humanity and AI.
Absolutely, absolutely, David. Thank you very, very much for this. It has been very interesting. I wish we could stay longer. It is a great subject to debate. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us and to everyone that has listened. As I wanted to remind you from the beginning, if you want to know more about AI solutions, you can contact Dr. JJ Gatt. The email is on the screen there, rolling, if you look down here, and you can also reach him out on social media. It's quite a popular figure here, so if you type in his name, I'm sure you'll be able to find you. JJ, thank you very much again, and have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you, Fran. This was lovely, extremely enjoyable. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Goodbye.